Alright, as requested, a quick little video on how I do rust using sponges. A couple of kinds of sponges here. It's packing material. These are actually from Flames of War miniatures, if I remember correctly. Vallejo Model Air Rust. This is mist gray, using any kind of a light gray, any primer color. And Vallejo pigment, just the red ochre dust. And I'm going to use a spare part from the Dragon T-34 that I am building at the moment. Alright, taking the sponge here, and I'm going to dip it in the gray. In this case gray, use any primer color you want. I'm just going to do a general spot right here just to get the same effect, similar to like I did on the Ford truck. So you're just going to go in and pick your spot. Start dabbing. Do the same thing around the edge. Just kind of dabbing the highlights across the whole thing. Then you're going to let that dry. Alright, the gray is dry enough to go back over. Usually let it sit a little longer. So you want to get some on the sponge, but you want to kind of dab it off like you would if you were dry brushing. You can see my little palette thing's a mess because I use this stuff everywhere. Over through the middle, leaving kind of the gray outside edge. You want to fill it in the inside, leaving some of what would be the primer showing through. And you get little sprinkles on the outside because rust is kind of irregular, I guess it'd be the best description. Hitting those edges where we tapped earlier, just a little tiny bit, just to dust it. Alright, so now you have the gray primer showing through, and then you have the rust, because the paint's going to wear off in layers, so you have to think of everything in multiple layers of colors. And if you're doing something like a service equipment for an aircraft that's been painted 10 different times, 10 different colors, you want to keep that in mind when you're doing the chipping going through. I normally let this dry a little more. I'm going to go over it kind of wet. You do a second layer through the very middle to darken it up. And you can always take the other side of the sponge and just kind of tap a little, soak some of that excess up. Then you want to set that off to the side and let it dry. I thought while I was at it I would show another technique. I picked this up out of a book by Mig Hernandez. This works really well when you're doing something that maybe has a step or railing, anything that's going to be a lot of wear on a regular basis. So you kind of paint. This also works good for paint chips, large scale chips and bubbles. So instead of spotting the area, you're painting the area. So I'm going to let that dry. Alright, the sponge side has kind of dried. So I'm going to take the dark red ochre here. Going to dust it on top of the rust section. I usually blow the excess off. I'm going to hit the edges with it, and then from there kind of streak it downward just a touch. Not a whole lot. Just kind of feather it off. Now if I was doing this for real, I probably would have darkened the middle of that up just a little bit more. But it gives you the idea. You know, it's something you experiment with, play around with it, use different tones, different colors, dark, lighter, depending on what you're doing. Once this other side dries, I'll go back and show you the worn off technique for a spot that has a lot of wearing on it. Alright, next step. Find the right brush here. Take the rust paint, go just inside. Doesn't have to be, it can go to the edge, doesn't have to be perfect, but you're going to fill the middle with the rust colored paint. Very simple. Kind of looks funny right now, but when you use it in the right location, such as a step, a toolbox on the side of a tank where somebody might climb up several times a day, you're going to have the wear pattern where you've worn down to the gray, and then you wear down to, you get a little surface rust, and then I'm going to go back over to one more layer in the middle here once that dries. Another quick share is I had a neighbor with a small child, so I collected a lot of baby food jars from him. That is pastel chalks from Michael's or Hobby Lobby, any art supply store. Walmart's probably got it too. Combine the different colors, use the X-Acto, chop them up really fine, crush it into a fine powder. Save you a whole lot more money because you can buy about 2 of these for the price I can buy a whole pack of those. Little money saving tip for those that don't do it. Alright, one last color, if you can read it there, is MSP series paint by, I think this is Reaper. Yep. This is a paint for miniatures, gaming miniatures, but I prefer it. MSP series is a little bit higher quality. This is a tarnished steel. I got a little dab right here, so I'm just going to take the tarnished steel, go to the inside in the middle of the rust section. Alright, same thing. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be clean, irregular. It's a weird spot to put it. I wouldn't put it on a tank in that location, but it's just showing you the technique. You let that dry, and then I'll go over it again, give it a little bit of streaks with the rust powder. When you combine this with some filters, a couple of washes, some weathering powders, it really does work well. Alright, this is the sewer water filter wash that I use. I'm just going to brush a little bit on here. Comes out really dark, really nasty looking, but when you kind of go over the whole area, go nice and heavy. Let it get all into the crevices and soak into different areas. Now, one thing different that I do that some people don't do, I have my nasty sock. It's an old sock that I use to kind of dab some of this back off. So I'll go in, if I want streaks, I kind of just pull a little bit of it off. Then I let that dry. That toned down the spot that was on there quite a bit. Once that dries, I'll hit it with the dust and then it'll be done. Alright, one last little step. Just going to take some of that rust pigment and dust over the top a little bit. You don't really want it above, especially if it's a slanted piece of metal. And that's it. So you can always go back. I used to take the powders when I was done and dull coat the whole aircraft, but it kind of defeats the purpose of using the powder because it makes it go away. So once I've done the powders now, I just leave it. And like I said, this works totally different. Handrails, you do that technique on the end of a handrail where you have someone crawling up and down. Gives you the shiny portion where they're touching it all the time, and then the little layer of rust, and then the outer primer. If you combine the two and do a couple sections of this, and then use the sponge to go around the outside, it really, really works well. I did a tugboat recently where I used a kind of a combination of the two. I hope it helps. You know, this is a really quick, really fast version of what I do. with the sponges. You can find this stuff all over the place. It's just packing foam. Really simple, really easy. This is a little exaggerated for example purposes, but gives you the idea. Thank you. Alright, this is a close-up of an M60 Blazer I finished not too long ago. I just wanted to show what it looks like with a different color of primer. So I kind of used a lighter color of green. It also gives kind of an oxidized look as well when you use the combination of the two. Top of the hatch here. This is all done with the sponge technique. And then there's powder and 2 or 3 filters and washes and everything else on there. But it gives you an idea of when you experiment with the different colors as far as your primer or base color. And you can actually do a multiple colored as well. If you're doing a green tank, use a little bit lighter shade of green. A gray tank, use a little bit lighter shade of gray. Gives it that worn kind of a color shift that you're looking for. And I thought I would throw some shots of the Ford Ranger. It kind of started it all. It is getting there. It's almost done. On the hood, I did some streaking as well as tried to give the look of faded paint. So when I painted it the first time, I didn't cover the whole thing. So I have light spots, dark spots. When you're gonna airbrush something and you want a worn, weathered look, you don't want a solid base coat. You want variations in the base coat of the paint. That helps you to give that faded look. There is also a wash over the top of this. Very subtle. It's called sewer water. Yeah, it's from a gaming company local here to Sacramento, Northern California, called Secret Weapon. Sewer water, baby poop, got all kinds of really wonderful colors. Really, really good washes. You can do a lot with them. Same with the inside of the bed. All the same technique. A few more gouging and scratching. I took my pocket knife and kind of scratched up the bed the best I could to give it more of a torn up look. And there'll be a lot of stuff in the bed of this truck, so it's not going to be that big a deal. But same technique.